Welcome to Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmedeke. It is Monday afternoon, so we are talking Broncos. So I am joined by Mr. Chris Thompson, who is still in the DC area. Chris, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. Great to have the whole gang back for the podcast after I did a solo effort
Yep.
with you last week.
Yep. So Kyle Fredrickson is back from his week-long hunting trip, and then he's going to be gone next weekend as he is also getting married. So Kyle, enjoy your one stop here in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys holding down the fort. This has been a busy time in the life of Kyle, but you guys do such an excellent job. I'm sure our listeners didn't miss a thing.
So we'll dive into the Broncos' 41 to 10 loss to the Ravens in a little bit. But first, we got to touch the Broncos were busy today, too. And Kyle, you actually did the reporting on the story of the Broncos have traded Baron Browning to Arizona for a sixth-round pick. The bigger news is that they've signed Jonathan Cooper, who we've talked about on this podcast needing a contract. So let's start with that first. How big is this for the Broncos?
I mean, it's big. It makes a lot of sense to have Cooper as a guy who signed long term. I think he's proven to this point that he's a real underdog success story, right? I mean, seventh round draft pick back in 2021, and he's done nothing but been solid since then, especially since the start of the 2023 season. I thought Broncos PR put out a really great stat. Cooper is just one of six defenders to record at least 100 tackles and 14 sacks since the start of last year. And you look at that group that he joins among those six guys, that's Max Crosby, that's Danielle Hunter, TJ Watt, Khalil Mack, Harold Landry. So, these are the elite of the elite defenders. And maybe, Cooper's not a household name, but the way that he started off this season, I think 5.5 sacks to start the year, the way that this unit has played just overall defensively, leading the team, I think George Payton's just doing the smart thing by locking him up for 4 years in a deal that's reportedly worth up to 60 million. And at the same time, as I'm sure we'll dive into next, letting Baron Browning out the door to Arizona.
But first, Chris, I want to ask you, this seems to be the George Payton, Sean Payton combo kind of playbook is if you are one of their guys, you're going to get your contract.
Well, let's look at the whole picture. I mean, Baron Brown was in a reserve role. He's got an expiring contract, and they probably weren't going to re-sign him because edge rushers, even if they're not super great, command huge deals. And there's tremendous depth at that position. Jonathan Cooper was kind of a security blanket, locking him up at the same time you're parting with Browning. But you got Nick Bonito, who's starting ahead of Browning. You've got Jonah Ellis, who is a future reserve, and who knows if things don't work out with Benito staying long term, then maybe he's a starter. You got Drew Sanders coming back from his injury soon, and let's not forget DeAndre Tillman. I mean, he's been inactive most of this season, but they activated him against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he has 2 sacks. So there's depth at this position. I mean, most of those guys we mentioned actually came before Sean Payton arrived. I mean, Baron Browning certainly did. Nick Bonito did. Jonathan Cooper did. But the bottom line is if you're still around on a Sean Payton team now, he likes you. The guys he inherited that he didn't like are all gone. So future looks pretty good at outside linebacker.
Well, and Kyle, Chris mentioned Nick Bonito and his kind of emergence this season made, and Barry Browning can't stay healthy. Like he's hurt, he's been hurt the last couple of years too. But the Nick Bonito emergence really probably helped this deal go through.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that you look at as developing and being a player who's starring on this defense, right? I mean, 6 sacks this year. That those are numbers that you might not have expected at the midway point for a guy like Benito. But he's really thrived, especially playing opposite of Cooper. Their personalities they mesh really well. They're two guys who are very good to talk to in the locker room. And I think if you're going to talk about, all the players who made this decision easier, Jonah Ellis, right? I know ICT brought him up a little bit, but he's a rookie that I think, when given opportunities, has really shined. So a lot of those good, moves that Peyton's made in the draft leading up to this point, it's allowed the Broncos to be in a position where they can get a 6th round draft pick for Browning, and use that to continue kind of building this rebranded football team with so-called Sean Payton guys. But yeah, the way Nick Bonito is playing has been really fun to watch. He's so bendy, not the most physically imposing guy, very tall, lanky, but can really get after the quarterback and we bring him down just with kind of one bare hand. He's been impressive to watch.
He was the one guy who I think actually tackled Lamar Jackson yesterday. I think Nick
Right,
Manning was the
exactly.
only guy who actually put a hand on Lamar Jackson, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But Chris, so the trade deadline is tomorrow. I don't know why everything is happening on Tuesday, November 5th. Between that, CFP is released. Oh yeah, then it's election day too. There's that too. So everything happens tomorrow, but there's been this conversation. Are they sellers? Are they buyers? Do they stand pat? I argued in our Friday face-off. I say you keep this team and go with it. Chris, what is your feeling on that?
Well, first, yeah, it's kind of strange that the trade deadline is on election day.
Yeah.
Basically, what happened is the trade deadline, the owners voted on it last spring, was pushed back 1 week because it used to be a week ago, basically. But I'm wondering if anybody thought at that time that, hey, it's election day, because the NFL wants to be king. They want to dominate the news in every avenue. And you hate to say it, NFL, but Harris versus Trump is a little bit more important this Tuesday. So maybe they'll adjust that in 4 years for our next presidential race. But from all indications, yeah, I don't see the Broncos as like bringing in some big time player, mortgaging the future. I mean, they like their group, they like the way they're trending. I mean, even if they don't make the playoffs this year, I think enough has been shown that this team is on the way up with Sean Payton. Bo Nix was the right choice at quarterback. So they don't need to do a knee jerk reaction. And the way the AFC is stacked up, I mean, they can certainly make the playoffs at 9-8. At 5-4, they're still in the number 7 spot. And you look at some of the teams that are chasing them, and they have tough schedules. I mean, the Bengals are right behind them, but they have a tough schedule. And right behind them, the Colts, same deal. I mean, I was talking to somebody today, and one huge advantage the Broncos have is that they are playing the NFC South this year. They're already 3-0 in those games. And some of those other teams in the AFC they're competing against for playoff berths are playing the NFC North or the NFC East or the NFC West, much tougher schedules. So the Broncos know that overall they can get into the playoffs without making a major move, I believe.
Yeah, Kyle, I kind of want to get your opinion because I argued that staying the course is probably the best idea. Like you need to see the Broncos have needed to rebuild since 2016, and they're finally kind of doing it. Do you see that as the right path as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you're a fan, your wish list of maybe what you want George Payton to do, go get a big name tight end, get a veteran wide receiver, someone to help this young receiving core and this young quarterback continue to develop. And we saw Adam Troutman, sort of explode in that Panthers game, but albeit against a not very good team. There are some needs, I think, but at the same point, there's not the salary cap space, and you don't really want to dump any of your existing players that Sean Payton really likes and that you're building a core with. So I would expect it to be a pretty quiet deadline, and in terms of other moves we see. This one was a little predictable with sort of signing one edge rusher long
Yeah.
term and letting another out the door. But this is the team that they're going to go with, and a lot of that is just being hamstrung by Russell Wilson's situation, and then his the salary dump, what the Broncos are having to deal with for this first year. So we'll see what happens moving forward and how aggressive they are at the trade deadline. But for now, Sean Payton, I think, said it best. Superman isn't walking through the door. And I don't know what position Superman would play. I don't know. What do you think, Chris? Like, I think safety. I think he could really roam the defense well.
Yeah, well, that's a nice little, if you remember with Rick Pitino years ago, Larry Bird's not walking through this door.
Hmm.
Kevin
Yep.
McHale's not walking through this door. So Sean Payton borrowed a basketball reference from
Nice.
some 20 years ago.
Yeah, Superman's a safety. I can see that. Good
Yeah.
roam. He can
Oh,
roam
for
back
sure.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. He's quick. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
What?
actually, if I might interject, Superman was Lamar Jackson yesterday, but
Yeah.
unfortunately,
Ooh.
he's not on the Broncos.
No.
Oh,
No.
okay.
And one more news note before we dive into yesterday's game, and that's so Dennis Allen was fired by the Saints today. Sean Payton guy, Chris, any call in, want to join as a consultant kind of deal?
Oh, that's kind of interesting. I mean, the news came out after the conference call today, I believe, or maybe it didn't. But anyway, how Sean Payton wasn't asked about it. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, he's been spending the last 2 years collecting former New Orleans coaches. So I'm sure he might give Dennis Allen a call and say, hey, you want to do some work or do you want to just kick back and collect on the money the Saints are still paying you?
I guess he did have his stint here already as well. He was defensive coordinator under John Fox, I believe. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Sunday's game. Ravens just kind of whoop up on the Broncos 41-10, like I mentioned in the open. Game was close there until about 50 seconds in the first half. I want to get both of your opinion on this, and Kyle, I'll start with you. Does this game change your overall thought of the Broncos at all?
Not really. I think the start had a lot of promise. You mentioned it. It's 17-10 with about a minute left in the first half. You think, hey, good on Sean Payton for getting points before the break, giving the Broncos momentum. But as CT mentioned, it's Superman on the other side, Lamar Jackson. The way that he played and the way that this offense dominated. It's predictable because the Ravens were mad. They just lost to the Browns the week before. The Broncos really hadn't had a true challenge against what I think is a Super Bowl contender in the Ravens. So to see them sort of lose that momentum and not be able to catch up in the second half, it's a young team trying to figure it out, right? And the Ravens, people dog their pass defense, but they have to throw late in games because their offense is so prolific. So it's just kind of the same formula they've used to beat a lot of teams this year. And the way that Sean Payton talked, it didn't seem like he was angry or upset. It was almost just, all right, that was a great team we played. We had some lessons to learn. Let's really learn from this. And I'm curious if, CT being there in Baltimore, if he felt the same way.
Yeah, I think definitely Sean Payton's tone was these are growing pains. A team like this is going to go through things like this. And Zach Allen today on the conference call had an interesting quote. He said, hey, everybody said that the sky was falling after we lost to Pittsburgh to fall to 0-2, and we need to sell everybody and what have you. And of course, they turned things around quite quickly after that and won 5 of their next 6. But definitely a different reaction. I mean, Miami last year, 70-20, that was a total embarrassing debacle. But this maybe was a little bit comparison to the Detroit loss last December when Detroit put I think 40 some
Yeah.
on them last year, 42. And at that point, there was a sideline confrontation Peyton had with Russell Wilson in that game. And Russell Wilson obviously wasn't Sean Payton's guy, and Bo Nix is. So that probably also contributes to a bit of a different tone than that big loss last December.
There was some Tony Romo on the broadcast, and Kyle, I know you watched the broadcast back here in Denver like I did. Did you hear how adamant he was that Jaleel McLaughlin should have not have gone out of bounds in that play in the second quarter?
So I was actually at a Broncos alumni watch
Oh, that's
party.
right.
So
That's
yeah,
right.
so I didn't hear all that, but I did see that play, and that it is interesting he makes that point. I'm curious what your analysis is on that.
So I totally agree with him because I was like, the Ravens were getting the ball with the kickoff too, like in the second half. And that's what happened is the offense did not touch the ball until they were down 31-10 again.
Mhm.
And it really, like, if he doesn't go out of bounds there, like, and Chris, I'll let you chime in on this too. They can try, they at least make the Ravens use their timeouts. I don't know if it wouldn't have mattered. I think the Broncos were losing this game Sunday no matter what. But you don't give them that chance to move the ball right back down the field, right, Chris?
Well, Peyton was asked about that today, and he said, well, maybe you milk the clock for a field goal, but I don't milk the clock for touchdowns. And he was trying to score a touchdown, which they did get, but it was called back by the Garrett Bowles penalty. I mean, yeah, I mean, you can make, arguments. Yeah, he should have stayed in bounds. They should have run the clock down, but to allow Baltimore to waltz down the field and score, boom, 53-yard touchdown reception. I mean, you're thinking that Baltimore has a reasonable chance at a field goal. They've got Justin Tucker, who holds the NFL record at 66 yards, but to let him go down the field so easily and score that touchdown on a 37-second drive was totally unacceptable. Devin Key, of course, missed the tackle at the 28. He had a rugged game filling in for PJ Locke the other day. So, I mean, I don't really bash the Broncos offense. I bash their defense for allowing that drive.
Well, yeah, Kyle, let's transition to the defense because it was we all picked the Ravens to win this game, but I don't think none of us picked a blowout. We all thought that it would be close and that this because of the Broncos defense. And they forced a punt on that first possession after the Bo Nix pick. And after that, they never forced another punt until Josh Johnson came in. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this defense now going forward as they face another pretty big test in Kansas City next week?
Yeah, I think it's a wake-up call in some sense because 41 points is 41 points, right? I think you could break down this game in a lot of ways and make excuses and talk about why the game slipped away from them and the ways that the defense still played well. It's Lamar Jackson being Lamar Jackson to some point, I also think, but in the grand scheme, it's no time to panic, right? I think when you look at it, it's a long season. Even the elite defenses are going to have maybe one or two games that are outside of their norm, right? Or outside of that average. So it will be curious to see against another elite offense in the Chiefs if some of those holes are exposed. The one thing that Sean Payton said on the conference call today, looking at the second half of the season, is that running the ball and run defense will ultimately determine how far the Broncos go and if they're a legit playoff team. And they couldn't stop Derrick Henry in that game. I don't know how many teams can
I was
with
going to say
how
nobody does.
large and big he is. It's fascinating to see how that offense operates with Lamar Jackson being so dynamic and working out of the gun, and then also having such a physical runner. Kudos to Todd Monken, who's the OC over there, also the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State when I covered them. So I know him as a very dynamic play caller, like very smart, laid back guy. But anyway, it's hard, right? So for this Broncos defense to fall flat in this game, it's not some reason to say, hey, they're frauds, but it is something to note during a long season and whether or not it becomes a trend against those elite opponents. Because right now, this defense has feasted on those teams that the Broncos should beat. But we'll see if they can climb the ladder and become one of those teams that can beat the best.
That's the most, Chris, that's the most open I've seen guys against the Broncos defense. Was there ever any thought, you think, to just have Surtain follow Zay Flowers around?
Well, he certainly followed plenty of receivers, in other
Yeah.
games. So Peyton wasn't asked that specifically. I mean, maybe Vance Josephs will be on Thursday, but yeah, Kyle touched upon it. I mean, this defense came into the Baltimore game ranked third in the league in both scoring and total defense, but it's not really a number three type defense. I mean, they were feasting on lot of bad teams, a lot of terrible offenses. Carolina, New Orleans. I mean, they haven't faced many good offenses this year. I mean, Pittsburgh's the best team that they faced, but they're not known as an offensive juggernaut. I mean, I think it's a good, and could he be very good defense, but certainly not an excellent defense. And we'll have to see how this defense does respond. I mean, they've got Kansas City, which hasn't really been tearing it up on offense as much as they have in previous seasons. And then the week after, they've got an explosive Atlanta team. So the key now is how this defense responds. I mean, I don't think they're going to, with these upcoming foes, be back in number 3 type territory. But hey, if they're a top 10 defense this season, that still is a super long way they've gone after all the issues last season.
Well, I do kind of remember the Chargers carved them up. Herbert carved them up pretty good in that game. I know that they didn't score a ton of points, but they went up and down the field on them too. So, there are definitely some cracks. Let's move to the offense, Kyle. And Sean Payton's talking about running the ball, and it sounds like he's ready to give Audric Estime a little bit more playing time.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear Sean talk about Audric, mostly because he didn't talk for very long. It was a short answer. But the question was, hey, is Audric a guy who's earned more carries based on some of the struggles to run the ball and be more consistent? With the side note of the guy has to hold on to the football, of
Yeah.
course, and he's had some fumbling issues. But Sean Payton kind of summarized his answer and said, to answer your question, yes, he is a guy who's a candidate for more carries. And he's got that explosiveness to him. His very first carry, he tried to leapfrog a Seahawks defender, fumbled on that play too. It was recovered by the Broncos. But you have to kind of find that lightning in a bottle and let it out if you have it as a young running back. It seems like these guys, after a couple of years, it's tough to maintain that explosiveness. Javonte Williams simply hasn't been that same guy, it seems like, since his knee surgery, maybe despite flashes now and then that he can be a true number one running back. But until one of these guys really steps up and establish it, it should really be a rotation until they figure out who has the hot hand and go ahead and ride it. And if I'm Sean Payton and I'm looking ahead at how to spark this offense, against some of the better teams in the league, put your rookie out there and see what he can do. Cross your fingers he's going to hold on to the ball.
So talking about, mentioning Javonte Williams there, Chris, we got to talk about the 2 fourth down calls in the first half as well. Javonte Williams comes up just short on that one, and then Bo Nix misses that deep ball Troy Franklin was open by 10 yards. But the Javonte Williams call, with 4th and less than 1, why are the Broncos pitching it 8 yards deep and then having him try to run?
Yeah, I thought that was a terrible call.
Okay.
I mean, I'm thinking Sean Payton has maybe seen a few Philadelphia Eagles games in recent years. They
Yes.
got something called the tush push there. I mean, it was a foot because they had just measured. And I don't know if they're trying to protect Bo Nix, not letting him sneak. But, well before the era of Jalen Hurts, I mean, Tom Brady was fantastic on sneaks. I mean, he got them all the time, and the Patriots didn't worry about risking Brady an injury in those sneaks, and he never got hurt on one. So, yeah, the call was ridiculous. And then they had the 4th and 4 call. I mean, granted, Troy Franklin was pretty open, but I mean, why throw deep in that scenario? You need 4 yards, and so those were a couple of crazy calls on 4th down. Maybe the 4th and 4 call, they should have used the Cortland Sutton throwing it to Nick's play or something of that nature, and then use their best 2-point play on that one. But at least the third one worked out.
So, Kyle, how did you see Nick's performance yesterday? He caught a touchdown pass with the interception. I mean, he had to loft that ball up a little bit more. I don't know if Humphrey could have caught it. I don't know. I'll let you answer that. But what did you kind of think of Nick's performance?
Uneven,
Yeah.
right? I think that Garrett Bowles holding call
Yeah, that's
really
tough.
changed the complexion of how we talk about his performance, right? Because if he scores that touchdown, it's the momentum of the game changes a little bit. The Broncos maybe don't go into halftime with such a big deficit, and they're a little bit closer in the second half. But a lot of what ifs, right? There's so many plays we could talk about. But the fact is his team got blown out, right? It was a bad loss, and it's not one that we can, I think really go silver linings on. Like, this is a game he's got to learn from. We've seen Bo Nix be resilient in the second half of games, orchestrate some comebacks. So there's a lot of belief, I think, anytime this team is down. So there's no reason to look at this game as like some kind of opus or litmus test on Nix and his future. we expected this. There's going to be these lumps, and so yeah, I'd call it maybe a C plus game. What did you give the offense? You give them a C in your grades?
Yes, I gave it a
Yeah,
C.
yeah, right. So
Just for
that's
the
what
first
I
half.
would give
Yeah.
Knicks too, right? Like just average, just good enough. I will say catching that touchdown from Cortland Sutton, Knicks had to get up a little bit,
That's
right? He kind of had to be a real receiver, fight off the defender, get through contact through the goal line. So I thought there was some backyard ball from him. Another nice football thrown by Cortland Sutton. Those trick plays to me show that Sean Payton has a lot of confidence in this offense, a lot of confidence in Cortland Sutton's arm. And he's willing to have a little bit of fun with the young group of guys. So I think there's some things to be taken away from that play to like. But you're not going to beat the Ravens, with one trick play. You're going to beat them with a really strong ground game that complements Knicks, and they just didn't really get that for 4 quarters.
you know,
I will say this though, if I can jump in,
yeah, sure.
uh, games earlier this season, even though they weren't going to win, Knicks has a late drive against Seattle.
Mhm.
He has a late drive against Pittsburgh. They score those late points against the Chargers, which kind of changed the complexion of it. And then after the game, you could say, "Oh, we fought. We never give up. We made a late run." And they were driving the ball late in that game against the Ravens. So if they had gotten maybe a few token late touchdowns or something like that and only lose 41-20 something, maybe that changes the tone a little bit, with we never gave up, and all that kind of stuff. But the mere fact that they were just blitzed on the scoreboard, basically 24-0 after it was 17-10, added to the total down nature of the game.
And Chris, watching this game, I think a lot of people are realizing that the Broncos are still lacking playmakers on offense.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, they're hoping that Troy Franklin can be one. He was open on that play, but the ball wasn't delivered. I mean, Cortland Sutton had a very strong game, one of the better games of his career statistically. So that's kind of a positive element. They don't have a lot of playmakers at receiver. I mean, Marvin Mims, we've discussed him before. I mean, we might as well just give up and ban Marvin Mims didn't get enough touches conversation on this podcast, because it's going to be the same every week. I mean, he's not a part of anything. And then you guys touched upon the running backs. I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin, you think, hey, he's got the potential of being a playmaker, can break some big ones, but really hasn't happened this year. And, part of it, we've discussed this before, when he's in the game, it's almost like telegraphed that he's going to run the ball. I mean, he started yesterday, first time this season that Javonte Williams hadn't started a game. Jaleel McLaughlin starts, and what do you know? He carries the
Yeah.
ball. I mean, totally telegraphed. So, yeah, to answer your question, though, they need some playmakers, but I don't know if Superman's walking through the door on Tuesday.
I don't believe so. I don't believe they're making a big trade for Superman. Kyle, you will not be. Chris and I will preview the Chiefs later this week, but I just want to get your thoughts. Chiefs play later this evening. Are they in Tampa, or is that at Kansas City?
It's a home game at Arrowhead.
Okay, so that's why they're favored by almost 10, I think. I almost think the Chiefs need to win this game, Kyle, so they don't get a ticked off Chiefs team on Sunday, like they got a ticked off Ravens team on this Sunday.
I think that's a good way to look at this. It sort of feels like the Chiefs are playing with house money to some degree, simply because they're undefeated. They're 7-0. They're still the Chiefs, but Patrick Mahomes isn't playing like the NFL MVP, and that's got to be so frustrating for so many other teams watching the Chiefs, because it sure feels like they have like that Patriots aura right now, where they're just the league's best, and everyone else is sort of chasing them. I will say, if you're going to look at any team that's going to maybe give them a run or not really be afraid of that aura, it's like a Baker Mayfield led Buccaneers team, and the way that, he's unafraid to sling the football downfield. He's got a lot of touchdowns. I know he's got several interceptions this year as well. But it's going to be an intriguing matchup for sure. But yeah, I think for the Broncos, they got over the hump. I believe it was last year, beating the Chiefs for the first time in forever. And so now they've got to try to extend on that and sort of prove to their fan base that they can play against very good opponents even on the road and be in games. Now it seemed like that happened the first half in Baltimore. Let's see if they can do it for two halves in Kansas City, a place that they know very well.
And like I said, Chris, you and I will preview this game more later this week, but the Chiefs' offense is not as explosive as the Ravens' offense this season, at least.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it just shows you how good of a coach that Andy Reid is. They're just winning in various other ways. I mean, if you looked at Mahomes' stats, I mean, you'd say no way are the Chiefs 7-0, but they're getting the job done. And this started to be kind of evident last year. I mean, even last year they weren't as offensively explosive, but the defense was better, and it translated into another Super Bowl crown. So, I mean, you can say that this is just simply a good all-around football team.
It'll be interesting. It's always, I as a fan, I used to get excited for Chiefs week, but then, losing however many it was in a row kind of ruined that. And the last time they won at Arrowhead was the last time they won before last year was that crazy game in 15 where they won on the fumble return. So it's been a long time since they've won at Arrowhead. All right, guys, thanks for coming on and breaking all this down. We had news, we had reaction, we had everything. Kyle's got the story up on today's news. Chris will have coverage all week. We all wish Kyle well in his marriage endeavor starting Friday. So good luck with that. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. Check out all these guys' works and the rest of the staff over at denvergazette.com. And we will talk to you guys later in the week and have a good one.